What if I told you that one of the biggest, most personal divides in all of Christianity, the huge debate over divorce, all boils down to how you translate a single, ancient Greek word? It sounds kind of crazy, but let's dive into how one word could cause such a massive and lasting split.
I mean, really think about that question. Could a single word from a text written 2,000 years ago really shape the rules of marriage for millions upon millions of people? Well, the answer is a resounding yes, and we're about to unpack the whole mystery.
All right, so to really get this, we've got to start at the beginning, with the original baseline teaching in the New Testament, and it's all built on this powerful idea of an unbreakable covenant.
So, this core concept has a fancy name, indissolubility. But what it really means is that a true marriage isn't just a piece of paper, a human contract you can just tear up. No, it's seen as something much deeper, a sacred bond that God Himself creates, a bond that's meant to last until death parts you.
And believe me, this wasn't just a suggestion. This line, a direct quote from Jesus in the Gospel of Matthew, is about as clear and absolute as you can get. It's a powerful, straightforward command. If God joins it, humans are not supposed to separate it. Period.
Okay, so if the rule is so absolute, so clear, where does all the disagreement come from? Well, this, my friends, is where the plot thickens. It all circles around something that scholars call the Matthew exception.
Okay, just look at this side by side. It is night and day. In the Gospels of Mark and Luke, Jesus' teaching is an absolute no exceptions rule. But then you get to Matthew, and he includes this tiny little clause, except for unchastity. And those three words, except for unchastity, they change everything. They blow the whole thing wide open, raising the one critical question that has divided theologians for centuries. What on earth does this exception actually allow? Is this a loophole? So, that leads us right into the first major school of thought on this, and it's one that has become foundational for a lot of Protestant denominations. It's simply called the adultery interpretation.
From this perspective, the answer is pretty straightforward. The Greek word for unchastity here is porneia, and this interpretation says it just means good old-fashioned adultery. So the logic is, if your spouse is unfaithful, they have broken the marriage covenant, which then allows the innocent person to divorce and even remarry. Simple as that.
But, you guessed it, the story does not end there. Not even close. The Catholic tradition and a whole lot of biblical scholars argue that we need to stop and put that one word, porneia, under a serious microscope. And this is where the real detective work begins.
So to get our heads around this counter-argument, we're going to put on our detective hats and follow 4 key clues that scholars use to try and decode what porneia really means. We'll look at the language, the legal context of the time, how the audience reacted, and what the other biblical writers had to say.
All right, clue number 1 is all about the language. Check this out. In the very same verse, Matthew uses 2 different Greek words for sexual sin. He uses porneia for that exception clause, but then he uses a totally different word, moichehomai, when he's talking about adultery. So that begs the question, right? Why use 2 different words if you mean the exact same thing?
Clue number 2 is all about historical context. The argument here is that porneia doesn't actually mean adultery inside a valid marriage. Instead, it refers to unions that were forbidden under Jewish law from the very beginning, things like incest. So in that case, divorce is less like breaking a valid contract and more like an annulment, basically declaring that a true, valid marriage never even existed in the first place.
Now for clue number 3, the audience's reaction. When the disciples hear Jesus say this, they are absolutely stunned. They literally say, wow, if that's the case, it's better not to get married at all. Now think about it. Allowing divorce for adultery was already a pretty common idea back then. Their shock only makes sense if Jesus was teaching something radically new and way, way stricter than they were used to.
And that brings us to our 4th and final clue. Just look at the rest of the New Testament for consistency. You've got the Gospels of Mark and Luke. They talk about marriage, but there's no exception. The letters of the Apostle Paul. He talks about marriage. Again, no exception. They all state the rule is absolute. That silence speaks volumes, right? It really seems to support the no exceptions reading.
So when you start putting all these clues together, you can really begin to see how this whole debate over one little word wasn't just some academic exercise. It literally created a deep, fundamental division in Christian thought and life that lasts to this day.
This timeline just lays it all out. For the first 1,500 years, think about that, 15 centuries, the Christian teaching was unanimous. A valid marriage is for life. Then, bam, The Protestant Reformation in the 16th century reinterprets porneia as an exception for adultery, and that creates the huge doctrinal split that we still have with us today.
And this isn't just abstract theology. This debate has had massive real-world consequences. Seriously, the way this one single word has been interpreted has directly shaped laws, social norms, and the most personal parts of life for hundreds of millions of people for over 500 years.
And that kind of leaves us with a pretty provocative final thought. This entire complex history, this profound division that affects so many people, all of it spiraling out from one single word in an ancient text. It really makes you wonder, doesn't it? How many other things we believe, maybe our deepest beliefs, also hinge on a single, contested word from the past.